Hi everyone, so today's question is a Fibonacci number. A Fibonacci number commonly denoted with Fn form a sequence called the Fibonacci sequence such that each number is the sum of the preceding two numbers. So starting from 0 to 1 and this whole sequence continues. So a Fibonacci sequence is simply 0, then 1, then we have to add 0 and 1, we get 1, then we add 1 and 1, we get 2, then we add 1 and 2, we get 3. So last two numbers will be added to get the next number in the Fibonacci sequence. So in this Fibonacci sequence we have to find the nth value, and n will be something we will be getting in our input. So we have to get the output out of it. So now let's solve the question. So yeah, this is our input example that we have just seen. This is the input and this is the output for that. So we are getting n equals to 2. So let's write a Fibonacci sequence first. 0, then 1, we will add these values, then we will get 1 again. Then we will add these two values, we get 2. So 2 becomes the next value. Then we will add these two values, we'll get 3. So 3 becomes the next value. Then we'll add these two values and we get 5. We will put 5 as the next value. Then similarly 3 plus 5, it makes us 8. Then 8. So this is our Fibonacci sequence and accordingly it will increase. So we are given with F0 and F1, and Fn is Fn minus 1 plus Fn minus 2. And we are given with 3 examples. N equals to 2, output is 1. So when n is 2, output is 1. So for nth position, when we are starting with 0th index, and for nth position we are getting 1 because n is 2. And then when n equals to 3, we are getting an output as 2. So this is n equals to 3. This is n equals to 2. And for n equals to 4, we are getting output as 3. So n equals to 4, we are getting our output as 3. So similarly, for whichever value of n that we are putting in the input, the output will be given by our function. So to understand this in a better way, we need to understand how Fibonacci series work. So we have just understood how Fibonacci series work. Now we will be writing a logic for that. So this can be solved in multiple different ways, and one such way is using recursion. And without recursion also we can solve it. We can solve it in an iterative method with a for loop, or we can solve it using recursion. We can create array also. There are multiple ways to solve this question, but one of the optimized way that I'll be suggesting over here is this. So we are going to store first our initial value as f1, or maybe the value from which we are starting, and f2 equals to 1. So we know that these two values will be our first and second value of the Fibonacci sequence. Now these two values are going to be always changing, and we will be taking the nth value based on the changing value of f1 and f2. So suppose we have to find n equals to 3. We will run a for loop, and the for loop will run from I equals to 2 to I less than equals to n. So when our for loop is executing, we will take the sum of f1 and f2. So when we are taking the sum of f1 and f2, we will be getting 1 because f1 plus f2, for the first iteration we are getting the sum. So when I equals to 0, the sum equals to 1. And what we will be doing, we will update f1 and f2 accordingly. So first we have to update f1 equals to f2. We are storing whatever value of f1 had, f2 had in f1. So f1 becomes f2, and now f2, this last value. So f1 is our second last value in the series, and last value f2 is sum. So I'm storing the summation of f1 and f2 in the last value. So first of all, when it was 1 and 0 and 1, we updated f1 with 1 by taking the value from f2, and when it is f2, we are just we are adding 0 and 1, and we are adding the sum over here. We are putting the sum in f2. Similarly, this whole thing will be repeated in the for loop. So our sum becomes 1 for the first scenario when I equals to, so when I equals to 2, this will happen. When I equals to 3, we'll get the sum as, we'll get the sum as 3. We'll get the sum as 2, and now as 1 plus 1 we have, so both the values f1 and f2 is 1, so that's why we have got the sum as 3. So similarly, when for ith index, when it is 3, we have got our answer as 2. So this is going to be this example that we have just seen. Similarly, for rest of the values also, we can find the f1 and f2 in this order. This is the most optimized version of Fibonacci series because the space complexity over here is O1. We are just keeping two variables. One is f1 and f2. So the space complexity is O of 1 and the time complexity is On, because we are doing an iterative method for loop. So the time complexity is On and the space complexity O of 1. So if we are using recursive method, the space complexity will be On for recursion. And if we are creating an array also, then also the space complexity will be On for recursion and for array creation. In both the scenarios, space complexity will be On. So the optimized version is this, but there are multiple versions through which you can write the code. And when you have completed this code, you can also check the blog which is attached with the video at the end. Using that blog, you will get to see different approaches which are possible for this question. So we are given with this function fib, where in input parameter, that is n, we are getting the input parameter. And what we have to do first, we need to understand if the value is less than 2, the returns will be equal to whatever I'm getting in n. So first we know when the value is 0, it will be 0, and when the value is 1, we know it will be 1. So considering that, if n is less than 2, return n. Now I will create the two variables, f1 equals to 0 and var f2 equals to 1. Now our for loop will run to update f1 and f2 constantly, where I equals to 0. So initially we will not start with 0, we will start with 2 because we already have the 0th index and the first index of the whole sequence. Now we'll start with 2 and I is less than equals to n, I plus plus. So first of all, we need to store the current sum equals to f1 plus f2. So this becomes the third value after 0 and 1. Now I am updating f1 and f2. So first I'll update f1. So now f1 becomes 1. So the new value that will be stored in f1 is 1. And as we have already stored current sum in current sum variable, f2 equals to the current sum. Now this becomes the current sum. So the current sum is basically the addition of 0 and 1. So I will be getting 1 again. So similarly, the whole loop will run for f1 and f2, and the value of f1 and f2 will be constantly changing. But at the end, after the whole iteration is done, the f2 value that we are going to get, that will be the return statement. So that is going to be my nth value in the Fibonacci sequence. So now let's run the code. Perfect. Now let's submit it. Yeah, we have the submission which is done. So now we can check there are similar questions which are related to Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci sequence was a very simpler question, but there are other options as well which are of medium difficulty. You can check them as well. So yeah, thank you.